Welcome to Technovation. I'm Peter High. I'm so pleased to be joined today by Jen Charters. Jen is the Chief Information Officer of Flagstar. Flagstar is a Michigan-based national mortgage lender with $31 billion in assets under management. She's been in that role for roughly 3 years now, after a 12-year stint, I should say, a dozen years at Ally Bank, where she was most recently the Chief Information Officer of Corporate Technology. Jen also serves as the president of the Michigan Council of Women in Technology, and looking forward to covering all of these topics with her, areas of responsibility that she has or has had as well. Jen, so nice to see you today.
Thanks, Peter. Great to be here.
Jen, let's begin with Flagstar, if you don't mind. For those who may be less familiar with it, I provided a little bit of an introduction as to what you do, but maybe provide a little bit more of that thumbnail sketch as to Flagstar's business, please.
Sure. So Flagstar is a community bank, and we operate our retail branches in about 5 states. We have a national charter that enables us to service customers nationwide. Mortgage is a pretty significant part of our business, mortgage origination. So we originate mortgages across the country. We also have a mortgage servicing business. We are the 6th largest mortgage servicer in the country, where we service not only Flagstar mortgages, but service for others as well. And within our community bank, we have both retail as well as commercial lending. As an example, we have a warehouse lending business, which is the 3rd largest warehouse lending business in the country. And we also offer a number of other commercial loans, including home builder finance and commercial real estate and C&I.
And you were the Chief Information Officer of the company. Talk a little bit about, and you've been there in role for roughly 3 years, as I mentioned at the top. Talk a bit about the IT department you inherited when you joined the organization. What did you find? And as a result of that, what were some of the first changes you looked to enact?
Yeah, so I mentioned the prominent role that mortgage had at Flagstar Bank, and if you were to go back to the financial crisis, I think at that time, they were hit pretty hard at that time with the impact on mortgage and mortgage lending, and a number of various regulatory issues that they had to deal with. And so the organization that I came into was clearly one that had been through, I will say, a bit of crisis and turmoil during that time. A number of cost reductions that were likely made, and decisions made about reducing potential investment and costs and things like that. And so I was fortunate enough to come into the bank at a time when it was now starting to turn a corner. Most of the regulatory issues were largely beyond, past them. And now we were starting to look forward toward, what was the, new Flagstar going to look like, the Flagstar that could now focus on growing. And so one of the challenges that I had was kind of coming into an organization that, had been very, I'll say, sort of risk averse, and maybe also less inclined to invest and think about things in more of an innovative way. So more, kind of, toe the line, hold the course versus continuing to kind of advance and grow. And so, when I came to it, that was sort of the situation that I was in. And so one of my goals was to now start thinking about how could we advance Flagstar in a more innovative, in a more digital way. And so a few things that I did was, engaging us with more of the FinTech culture. So one example was engaging with the University of Michigan in their FinTech club and doing like a challenge with them. Another example was we created basically a mortgage technology accelerator. So they were a venture capital firm, and so they helped us put together this program where Flagstar engaged with a cohort of fintechs to both coach them in terms of, what would it mean to engage directly in a corporate environment, and how do they ensure that their platforms are able to support what a business, in real life needs to have happen, including all the regulatory concerns that are necessary. And then also, giving us an opportunity as an organization to learn from them. So what is it that these fintechs are seeing? What are they doing? What's different and unique that they're providing? And how do we Flagstar learn from that? So those were some of the examples of a few things that I tried to engage the organization in to start that, start planting the seeds of innovation and growth.
Really interesting examples. And I find fintech particularly interesting, Jen, as older organizations like your own begin to engage with them. There's sort of this, what some have referred to, there's a Yale professor who developed the term Coopetition. There's a cooperation aspect to it, but of course there's a competitive nature potentially as one engages with the fintechs. I'm curious if you happen to have a perspective on that. Clearly you are one to lean in towards the fintechs as there's a lot to learn from them, and of course ways in which to partner with them that could be productive to an organization like Flagstar. But also being cognizant of the fact that even if it's small snippets of a broader business like your own, there's the potential for competition. How do you think about that, if you don't mind my asking?
Yeah, so generally what I would tell you is that these fintech companies do not want to become a regulated bank entity. And so where we have a value and a benefit is the fact that we do have that bank charter, that we can do the things that banks can do. Whereas these fintechs typically find like sort of their niche. What is it that they do really well? And it tends to be pretty narrow, at least in the early stages. And so they don't really need the overhead or want the overhead of what it would mean to be a full-size bank. So to me, it's just a win-win. There's no concern to me in terms of, the fear of, competition or them coming in and taking over and kind of, taking away our customer base. They tend to have their clear objective of what it is that they do. It tends to be relatively narrow versus, Flagstar as an example, as a bank, we have a much broader platform to engage consumers and to deliver services. And we also have a lot of that, sort of the foundation in place to be a bank and to deal with the sort of regulatory nature of what we do. So to me, it's all win-win. Recognizing, for example, the size of Flagstar, I don't have the capacity or the dollars to invest at the level that, say a Chase, a Wells Fargo, Bank of America have to invest in technology. And so for me, this is a great opportunity to engage with these fintechs who have this creativity. They have dedicated resources focused around whatever that niche is. And if that makes sense for us, we partner together and we bring it together. And so to me, there's no concern about, sort of the competitive nature of this. This is all just, we can provide value to them and they can provide value to us. So I'm a big fan.
That's great. What a great answer. I appreciate that perspective. So now fast forwarding, you talked a bit about some of the changes that you made and some of your own diagnosis of the IT organization that you came to lead in joining the company. Let's fast forward now further to today. Well, I should say like a year ago, of course, there was a lot that changed for all of us, and the need to lean on digital revenue streams, digital means of communicating with and interacting with customers, digital means of evaluating the health of our operations, and to say nothing of the health and happiness and productivity of our employees, became profound in a way that none of us could have imagined 15, 16 months ago. I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the work that you and the team did. I guess it would be in your first couple of years of your tenure. No one would have been preparing specifically for a pandemic and a quarantine and so on. But talk a bit about the way in which the changes that you enacted in those first couple of years pay dividends in terms of fostering resilience over the course of the past time that we have been experiencing the pandemic, the quarantine, and all of the other consequences accorded with that.
Yeah, I mean, sometimes you're smart and sometimes you're lucky. And I think in some of these cases, we got a little bit lucky at the same time. But a couple of things that I would point out is that, we also have started investing a lot more in cloud infrastructure and cloud environments. And, just giving you an example of, for example, our mortgage business tends to be relatively cyclical. So, as the pandemic struck and the economy started to falter, you had the Federal Reserve dropping interest rates. When interest rates go down, everybody starts thinking about refinancing their mortgages and throw on top of it just the incredible uptick in, I'll say, new purchase volume, because as people are spending more and more time in their home, they're discovering they want maybe a different home, or a home that, maybe they want to do a complete remodel of some sort. So they need a HELOC or something, take some investment out of their home. So what I would say is, with a business that tends to be pretty cyclical in nature, where you have these peaks and valleys, it is a great opportunity to have more elastic infrastructure. And so being able to make sure that we have that kind of infrastructure that can scale as needed, and tying more of that variable cost to the variable nature of the business, to me makes a lot of sense. And we started investing in leveraging the cloud in the last several years. And I would say it absolutely paid dividends in the event that, as mortgage started growing and the volume started coming in, that we were able to handle the capacity and that growth, with our platforms. So, that's just one example of where, we started investing in these platforms in the cloud. And I would say, that really has paid dividends for us.
You've also, as I mentioned at the outset, you have experience at Ally Bank, a dozen years there, rose to be a one of the CIOs of that organization, a bank that had itself kind of a rebirth as a digital bank, was not its history back to GMAC, it's certainly a digital immigrant as opposed to a digital native organization, but one that really refashioned itself as a digital bank. There are a number of banking institutions who now refer to themselves as digital banks or technology companies that happen to be in the financial services space. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about, especially given the dynamism of that and the number of organizations that are making significant bets in that direction, how do you think about that further differentiation or even the pathway to accomplishing something akin to that within an organization like Flagstar?
Yeah, so it's such a great question, and it's one that I often reflect on, because I think about sort of how Ally got to where it got to. So understanding the history of it, it originated as part of GM. It was GMAC at one point in time, and it was late 2006, roughly, when GM sold a significant portion of the business to a private equity company. And then, of course, the financial crisis hit in 2008. GMAC did have a significant business in mortgage, as well as some prime mortgage, which, of course, we know was pretty challenging at that time. And as part of the government's support for GMAC, one of the things that they did was made GMAC a bank. So they gave, we became a bank holding company. And of course, with that, there eventually was the rebranding to Ally. And a big part of that was now creating a digital bank. And if you think about sort of this is where you kind of get lucky to some degree, right? The technology, and I think the world's appetite for a digital bank was ripe at that time. But it was an easier thing to do to go build a digital bank than to go build a bunch of brick and mortar branches throughout the country, and the costs associated with that. So it was really kind of the crisis of the financial situation of the company that kind of forced GMAC into becoming this now digital bank. This is where you and I have talked before. It's the sort of don't let a good crisis go to waste, where, as a company, there was a real opportunity there, but I'm not sure that would have happened without that sort of crisis having happened. a little bit of history there on kind of how Ally came to be and how it became that digital bank. And now as I look at, Flagstar, and where does Flagstar want to go and what does Flagstar want to be, creating that case for change to be a more, digitally savvy organization, it becomes harder. As I mentioned, with the pandemic that just happened, our business actually did very well, because when interest rates drop and everybody goes and refinances their mortgages and all of that, the business actually picks up and it actually does extremely well. And so when you're in a situation where business is good and growing, how do you create that opportunity for change? How do you create the impetus for change? And it becomes a lot harder in that circumstance than, if you go back to the Ally situation where, we were on the verge of bankruptcy, government bailout comes in, saves the company, and, we have to transform. So it's not quite the same, scenario when you go into a company that's performing extremely well. How do you create that impetus to change? Why should it change if things are going well? And so, so to me, that's a really big, sort of lesson in terms of how do you create the burning platform? How do you kind of envision that future so that you don't fall into a trap of, let's call it the blockbuster effect or the Kodak effect, of where you have a business, you've got something that's performing well, at least right now. But if you ignore the future, if you ignore future trends and where things are going, you could potentially fall into the trap of falling so far behind that you can't catch up.
Yeah, great points all. And I know that from our past conversations, as you've thought about the culture you want to foster within the organization, there's an acronym that you've developed, C.O.D.E, which applies nicely in a more traditional sense to a technology organization. But I wonder if you could define the 4 aspects of the acronym and their meaning from your perspective.
Yeah, so within the IT organization, I felt it was important that I kind of put my own sort of fingerprint on the culture of the organization. And so we built out what we call IT Code. And code stands for curiosity, objectivity, determination, and engagement. And to me, the biggest one is the C, the curiosity. So it's not accepting things just the way that they've always been, but how do we kind of dig in and understand the why? It's the, continually asking of that question of why are we doing this? And really getting curious about it to get to the point of getting answers. So to me, that's so important. And then, I always believe in being data driven. So rather than just, hey, it's my gut, this is, I just think it's the best way that we should move forward. Let's make sure that we're pulling the data together. And that means data both inside the organization and potentially data outside the organization. So we can't possibly, get every data point to make the right decision. So how do we go use the resources around us to be able to find enough information to get us comfortable with that decision-making process? So using facts and data to be able to help us decision things. Determination, I mean, this is one of my favorites because it's all around, sort of a growth mindset, and it's about grit, and it's about, we can do hard things. And not only do we start hard things, but we finish hard things. And, you can kind of go back to the Detroit, kind of, blue collar, gritty model. And, given our roots here in the Motor City, having that determination, being able to fail and be able to pick yourself back up, learn from that mistake and keep going. So I think determination is really, really important as well. And then in terms of engagement, to me is, creating purpose behind what it is that we do. So, for example, during this most recent pandemic, the PPP program, the Paycheck Protection Program, was something that we had to address. And so, I will tell you, we got the requirements around what it was supposed to be, probably within, 24 to 48 hours of having to deliver something. And so, my team had to kind of really dig in and work, put in a lot of hours to try to deliver on something. And one of the things that got us through was the purpose behind that. We weren't saving lives like the doctors, on the front lines, or the EMS, or the nurses, but we were trying to save livelihoods. It was about, how do we help that small business owner, that minority business owner, be able to get a loan to be able to keep their business afloat. And so when you create sort of that sense of purpose behind something, it really helps engage people to want to do the work, and it makes them feel good about the work that they do. So engagement is really important. And the second part of that is also around diversity, equity, and inclusion. That is something really important to Flagstar. We really value diversity in the workplace. And so when you engage, it's also engaging those that aren't like you, engaging others that maybe have different opinions than you. And so having that sort of engagement of diverse perspectives. So that's a bit around IT code. It's, there's a lot packed into it, but, it's one of those things that I feel proud about, that's something that we've created and that we kind of stand behind.
That's wonderful. Yeah. Thank you for that overview. You are also, as I mentioned before, the current president of the Michigan Council of Women in Technology. And, gender diversity is something that there's been new light shined upon that, especially within IT organizations, a field that has not been historically as diverse, especially from a gender perspective, as other parts of organizations. Certainly, some great progress has been made. You're a great representation of that as a CIO within your organization, a CIO multiple times over now. But I wonder if you could maybe reflect for a moment about the sort of the state of the Union of Women in Technology, what you have seen as progress, as well as progress you hope to see in the months and years ahead.
Yeah, so thank you for asking about it, because I think it's really important. And it's an important thing for us to address as we think about, so first of all, I'm not sure that we've moved things as forward as we'd like to move them, especially with the pandemic. I think, there's a lot of what I'll call sort of the traditional role of the woman that impacts our ability to continue to advance in the workplace. So, I often think about the fact that I still do the grocery shopping and cook the dinners and, do the laundry and, all of those things, even though, I also go to work and I, bring a paycheck home every couple of weeks. So, I think that there is a ton of opportunity for us to continue to bring more women into the technology field. So, a couple of things that I would point out is that technology jobs are some of the highest paying jobs that exist out there. And so for women who want to lift themselves out of sort of the, either lower class or even, maybe lower middle class into a higher level of income, it's a huge opportunity if they were to take advantage of getting the skills needed to become a technologist. There's a huge opportunity for them to lift themselves up so that they can have independence. And I think that is so important. It's not that there aren't other careers that can give you this, but technology specifically has a great opportunity around it. And, I still remember when my dad drove me to college, after, on my way to Michigan State. And one of the things that he said to me is, don't ever depend on a man. And it was sort of interesting that it was coming from him. But I also, kind of throughout, kind of growing up, my mom always had this, belief that, there was this sort of empowerment of women and girls can do anything. But interestingly, when she was growing up, that wasn't the case. She had the option of either becoming a teacher or becoming, a secretary or nurse. There weren't just as many opportunities there. And so she actually ended up falling a lot into the role of, sort of the mom and, the sort of traditional roles. She was also a teacher, but a preschool teacher. And so from just an income standpoint, there was a differentiation between her income and my dad's income that meant she didn't have as much, I'll say, independence. And so I think for women, for us to have that level of independence and technology careers can help us get there. But I think that that's really important. It's very empowering. And then, the other thing would just be that there is, from an economic standpoint, we need to fill technology roles. There's a huge gap in terms of, for example, information security professionals. There are not enough of them. There's a huge shortage of information security professionals. There is, I think, we're going to see as the baby boomers start retiring, there is going to be more and more demand for people in technology to kind of come up and replace those who may be retiring. And so as a state, as a country, I think we need to be mindful about how are we filling that pipeline. And if we forget about, 50% of the population as an opportunity to fill that pipeline, then we will be completely short-sighted in being able to deliver on, getting people into good jobs. And so I think from just a pure, economic standpoint, it's important that we invest in that. So just to put a quick plug in for the Michigan Council of Women in Technology, our mission is to become the #1 state for women in technology. And one of the things that we do is we build a whole pipeline, like we focus on the life cycle. So that means we're starting at the level of kindergartners, the kindergarten through 8th grade. We are putting programs in place to introduce girls to technology. Then we focus at the high school level. And, how do we keep them engaged, get them scholarships so that they can, potentially go to college and study computer science. Then within the college years, making sure that they stay connected. Because I can tell you as the female that was going through a computer science program myself, I was a minority. So I was one of only a few people in those classes. And there was, I felt like I was sort of missing out on my sort of network, and there weren't a lot of people like me. So it was really easy for me to want to say, you know what, this is hard, and I don't know if I want to keep doing this. And there were many moments where I thought about dropping out, but there were programs that were in place. Like at the time I was in school, it was the Society of Women Engineers, where there were communities of people that I could connect with that made it possible for me to stay in the field. And so at the college level, that's what we want to do, is make sure that the women who are there stick with it. And then, of course, when they graduate and now they have a career, we want to be able to give them the programs that they need to continue to hone their skills, as well as to grow their leadership skills so that they can eventually become, hopefully a CIO of a company as well. So I think it's a great program, and I'm proud to be a part in helping to lead that.
That's wonderful and amazing, the ways in which you were paying things forward with the experiences that you've garnered along the way as well. I'm sure that many women are going to benefit from that. I also want to mention something that I know from our past conversations that I greatly admire about you, Jen, is as a working mother, you went back and got your MBA. You have a computer science degree from Michigan State. You also have an MBA from Michigan, and I'm always amazed by single people who manage to work as well as get an MBA. You added a lot more you had a lot more on your plate when you embarked on that. But I know that it was an important aspect of rounding out your sets of experiences of being a technologist with business acumen. So I mean, I admire you greatly for having made that speaking of grit, making that investment in yourself.
Yeah. And I'll tell you, I give tons of kudos to my husband at that time, because I had a 2.5-year-old and a 5-year-old when I decided to go back to college. And so it was, working full time and then trying to do that in the evenings on top of it. And, certainly not an easy thing to do, but I'm grateful that I was able to do that, because it's been, a huge help for me to understand better the business. And I've heard you talk about how one of the roles in the organization that has such a great purview to everything going on in the business is the CIO. And being able to have the technology background combined with that business acumen, I think gives a CIO so much more power to really be able to speak both languages. It's almost like learning a different language, right? You can be the translator of, what is the business need and the business imperative, and what is the technology way that we can solve for that problem.
Jen, in recent days, there was a very exciting announcement that New York Community Bancorp is going to acquire Flagstar. I realize it is very early days in the immediate aftermath of the announcement, and so there's a lot of details yet to be sorted out. But wondered if you cared to offer sort of a perspective based upon what you know at least so far.
Yeah, so it is exciting news, and I'm very excited about the opportunity to partner with New York Community Bank as we bring together and merge the two companies. I think more and more M&A activity is happening in the banking world, and a big part of that is the ability of these banks to invest in technology. And so, the bigger the banks, the more that we have the potential to invest there. One of the things that you and I talked about is also the ability for an organization to shift and to change. And so when there is either a crisis, as I talked about in the ally world, that kind of force that change. In this case, we're talking about the potential of a merger where you have two companies coming together with different cultures, with different systems, with different processes. And so it's creating sort of that inflection point for us to be thinking about what is the best way for us to move forward. And, it could be the New York Community Bank way, it could be the Flagstar way, or as we also talked about, it could be a third way. It could be a completely different way for us to go forward. And I think it's a huge opportunity for us to think about, what are the habits and things that we want to maybe retire? And what are the new habits that we want to create as a go forward combined organization? So, to me, this is a really big opportunity for us to use this as an inflection point and to say, what kind of bank do we want to be when we grow up? And so with change, creates opportunity. And so I'm really excited about what that future might be and how we kind of create the bank that we want versus necessarily the banks that we are today.
That's fantastic. In the couple minutes we have left, Jen, I wanted to ask you, as you look to the future, what are some trends that particularly excite you? We've talked about a number of them that are related to FinTech and the evolution towards becoming a greater, a more digitally savvy organization. But wanted to check to see what aspects of that you find particularly interesting.
One of the things that I would tell you that I think is really important and for any organization will help them accelerate their digital agenda is having people on the business side who understand technology, working in partnership with the technology organization itself. And so I think occasionally there can be sort of this fear that when the business starts understanding technology, that, will that make my job irrelevant? But what I always say is it takes two to tango. And even in an innovation agenda, if you don't have the kind of top-down goal or objective to change an organization toward a more digitally savvy set of platforms, then you won't get very far as a CIO, right? Like you can only take the agenda so far, but if it is a combined agenda driven by the business, then you can go significantly faster. And so there are certain trends around kind of enabling the business with, low code, no code type solutions with, when I think about sort of the, even analytics space. The business knows their data way better than I know their data or than any of the technologists know their data. And I use the example of like, imagine that you're creating a spreadsheet. What if you had to ask your technology organization to create that to create that spreadsheet for you. So you're going to have to give them business requirements. You're going to have to document all of those. You're going to have to make sure that they understand it. They're going to build it. They're going to show it to you. You're going to say, well, I'd rather, it look like this. Can you change the formula? It shouldn't be this. It should be that. And can you imagine the overhead of creating a spreadsheet if that's what you had to do? But if your business is enabled to be able to create certain technology on their own, then to me, that's very powerful because they know their business. And so we as an IT organization lay the foundation, we build the frameworks, we put the governance around it, and then we say, here, have at it. So whether it's things like RPA or, sort of these low code solutions or business analytics, let's let the business kind of move forward in helping to deliver on some of these solutions themselves. So to me, one of the trends is sort of that empowerment on the business side to deliver technology solutions also.
Jen Charters, thank you so much for a really wonderful conversation. I'm so impressed with the clarity of your thinking and the clear way in which you described the many changes you've ushered in your 3 years as leader at Flagstar. More about the kind of partnerships and ecosystem that you've established, the means by which you've drawn from your past experiences, the cultural changes you foresee. Really a great conversation. I really appreciate it.
Well, thanks for having me, Peter. And, I really appreciate your perspective as well. And I think you helped me kind of refine and think about my approaches and how I might think about things kind of going forward. So I really appreciate what you bring to the table. And I've really enjoyed our conversation today.
Thank you. That means a lot to me, Jen.